What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Jake, and in today's video we're going to be doing a little bit of a hardware review video. Today we're testing the M1 Max Macbook Pro from Apple. This is the 16-inch model, and just in case you're wondering, everything except for the hard drive has been spec'd out to the max, so I'll put that spec sheet somewhere over here for you to check out. And the total price of this MacBook Pro is right around $4,800, which happens to be very close to the PC I was using before. So real quick, before we actually dive into the testing, I want to talk about what I was using before and then why I decided to switch. So about a year ago, I wanted to switch to a new machine. So I decided to get the spec'd out 27-inch iMac that was on the Intel processor. And it was pretty good. It just wasn't a big enough jump from what I was using prior to that machine to justify sticking with it. So I was looking for something that was much faster, and that iMac was just a little bit faster. So I ended up doing a ton of research on building my own PC, which I had heard tons of times you can get just as fast of a machine for half the price if you just build it yourself, just jump to PC. And that was true. I did build a very fast machine for right around $4,500 US. Granted, that was a little bit of an inflated price since we were in that big chip shortage time. That was March of 2021. So it was not easy getting parts. But after all my research, I ended up getting everything I needed to just about build the dream machine build that I had in mind. I got the results I was looking for, and it held out for quite a while. But I did expect Apple to make an introduction into more of the prosumer market with their M1 chips, and that's when the M1 Max and M1 Pro came out. So I'm not going to go into too many details, but essentially the Apple ecosystem is something that I guess isn't considered when we think about performance, just raw performance, but there's a lot of efficiency gains just by having all of your machines tied to one account, and they all kind of just work together. So having your phone, your MacBook, your iPad, your watch all sync together, just taking notes and transferring files from one to another, there's just a whole lot of efficiency gains there that I feel are really underrated. The more connected you are in that ecosystem, the more you can really benefit from it. So it's really just a lot of marketing, but it actually does benefit the consumer as well. And that's why I've been trying to switch back to Apple since I basically built that PC. It's been great for what it is, and this isn't going to be a direct comparison of the performance between these two machines, but if that is something you guys do want to see in the future, definitely leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below letting me know, and I'll be sure to get to that in the near future. Also, we recently did a survey, and the majority of you, regardless of skill level, are struggling with shot matching, balancing, skin tones, and working with 8-bit footage. So we created a 1-hour-long free training that covers all of this, plus we'll wrap up the training with an extensive Q&A, and you'll also get a link to download the practice footage, power grades, and some of our personal LUTs. So that was definitely a long-winded introduction, but in just a second I'm going to go ahead and break down what to expect from this video, so be sure to stay tuned, and let's go ahead and roll the intro. Alright, so now you have an idea of what I've been using in the past and basically the workflow expectations I have and what I need this MacBook to be able to do as far as performance goes to replace the machine I'm currently on, which is that PC. So the question today is, will this MacBook replace my PC as my go-to workstation, at least until Apple releases that M1X or M2 chip in their Mac Pro systems that hopefully will be pretty intense of a machine. So when that does come out, I definitely have my eyes on that as well. And of course, we'll do some more review videos at that time. So like I said, in this video, I'm going to be focusing on the most important performance characteristics of this machine for us as colorists. So it's not necessarily going to be an all-around video editing review. We're going to be looking at noise reductions, several different OFX tools, and then also we're going to be looking at how those perform on different codecs and then with a mixture of those codecs. And we're going to see how they all perform with render times and playback speeds. Does it slow the machine down? Is it still very snappy when you hit that space bar? Or do we have to have that delay and then it starts playing full speed? So basically I've got a list here of my expectations, what I would like to see out of this machine and what I expect really. For noise reduction, if we can get around 20 frames per second with noise reduction enabled, for most codecs, that's going to be pretty suitable. A lot of times you don't really need that full speed playback with noise reduction. It's great to have, but if you have to do some caching, it's not a big deal. For heavy OFX, obviously I use a lot of OFX in most of my grades, whether it's color space transforms, the glow tool, noise reduction is one of them, and then a lot of film grain and other outside third-party plugins as well. That's a really important factor there. So I want to see how it performs there. One with ProRes footage, also with Red Code RAW, and then of course with H.265, H.264 footage because they're very compressed and usually not as edit friendly. And then of course to wrap it all up, I'm going to have a few different timelines that we're going to use to accurately compare the render times of different codecs, and then we'll have one longer timeline that's going to be a mix of different codecs, all that footage really thrown together. We're going to see if it's able to sustain sustain that performance on a slightly longer render. Still, I expect it to be less than a 10-minute render, so it's not going to be a super long duration that it's performing at that peak performance, but it will be enough for us to see if we start to see any drop in those render times. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so here we are in Resolve. We're about to start doing our actual testing. I've got a few different timelines all broken up by the different codecs we're testing today. And then all of them are going to share, for the most part, the same node tree, which I'll go over here in just a second. We're stacking a few OFX, and granted, I am leaving some OFX out of this test. There's no real way to test everything, so I figured let me just test the most generic grade that I'll be using on a day-to-day basis, so we can get a very real-world sense of what to expect from this machine. And then, as I said, all the clips do share, for the most part, the same grade. There's one node that's more of a balancing node, just to make sure everything looks somewhat decent. So let's go ahead and jump in, check out the node tree, and start doing some actual testing. All right, starting off, we're going to be beginning with our ProRes clips. And like I said, the entire node tree is pretty much the same for every single clip. I guess I'll label this last one here as well, which is Look Designer. We're leaving out like a lot of power windows and everything. We're just getting this node tree built with what we'll actually be using, stuff that's actually going to make a difference on the results we get with these tests. So going through the node tree, we have our balancing node and then a little bit of halation using the new Resolve Halation OFX tool, and then some glow and a Look Designer plugin, which really just works as our method for getting our log footage into Rec 709 and making it look a little bit nice. And then also, just to take this one step further, we're going to add in a timeline node, and in this node we're going to have an extra layer of film grain, because that, again, one of those most commonly used tools that you may be incorporating into most of your projects. So like I said, first we're going to be doing all these playback tests with noise reduction off, and then I'll address my expectations for what I hope to see with it turned on. So here we go. Let's go ahead and hit that space bar and see what happens here. And pretty much immediately we get full speed playback. And you'll notice up here in basically the frame per second counter, it takes a second to show full 24 frames per second. But if you're looking at the actual monitor, you'll see it's full speed, even though it doesn't quite say it is yet. I think that's just been a bug like for as long as I can remember in Resolve. But you can probably hear me hitting the space bar, and there is absolutely zero lag right now. Granted, this is ProRes, so this is probably the codec I expect to perform the best. But with that being said, we're going to let this play through for a second and see if it drops any frames. And honestly, it does not look like it's having any issue even jumping from clip to clip. They all are from that super fast internal SSD. That's where they're all located, and it's pulling from that hard drive. So that's pretty reassuring for me right there off the bat, off to a great start. Pretty impressed with the results so far. Yeah, so bouncing around from clip to clip, we're having no issues whatsoever. This is, again, ProRes 422HQ. And now let's go ahead and switch to our Red Code RAW timeline. And you'll see this one has a lot more clips in it as well. So these are a 12:1 compression, I believe. So basically, if these play back fine, which it does, again, that space bar, and then we have no delay, it's immediately jumping to full speed playback. And that's a whole other element of it. Like if it took us, a second and a half between hitting the space bar and it beginning to play, even if it was at full speed, that's cool. We really need that snappiness. So as soon as I press the space bar, we're getting playback. And again, very snappy, watching this play through. And of course, it just has no issue just chowing through this red footage right here. So we're just playing a couple back to back. And granted, this is without noise reduction. So for the most part, everything you're seeing here is pretty easy on the system. We do need to go ahead and add in that film grain as well here in this timeline. And I honestly I don't expect to see any delay or any change in the performance overall. Back to the clip node trees, and just like I expected, it's full speed again. I think it might have dropped a frame, which is why we have that red marker, that red bug next to 23.976. So it is playing back at full speed, but it might have dropped a frame earlier on. But yeah, I'm not really seeing any issues here. This is totally workable, and if anything, it's just as good as the PC that I had built before. What I would like to do though is push this to its limit, see how far we can take it until it actually does start really suffering, and then seeing what we need to do to get it back to full speed. So I guess that's probably going to be noise reduction is all it's going to take if I had to guess. But I'll also drop in just a ridiculous node tree here with tons of nodes, whole lot of stuff going on. It'd probably be my 16mm power grade. And if it plays back full there, I think that'll be a decent test just with everything enabled, because there is a lot going on in that power grade. So yeah, like I said, we're getting full speed playback here. It's pretty jumpy. It's immediate. Here with the Red Code RAW, it's a little bit slower in how long it takes to actually start playing back, but the playback is full speed. So just a slight delay here. And then let's go ahead and jump over to what I expect to be the worst performer of them all, which is going to be GoPro footage. So let's see once we get these clips loaded up. And it's all from the same angle, but I've just cut it up into different bits and pieces, just so we can get sort of a real world idea. Because if we're playing back just one file all the way through, it's not quite going to be pushing the machine when it's actually having to use those predictive and bi-predictive frames to build the frame we're actually trying to look at. So by adding those cuts in there, we are actually getting to test the system and really push it and really put it through its paces. So we're going to go ahead and mute that, and we'll go ahead and start playing. And again, not an issue at all here. Let me make sure that grain node is added. It is not. So we're just going to drag that on again. And then again, full speed playback. This is actually playing back better than the red code raw footage was, which I wasn't necessarily expecting. See no drop frames, and it's playing back just fine. So yeah, no issues at all. It's playing back very quickly. It's very snappy. And we're having, again, zero issues whatsoever. A little bit of information clipping here, but like I said, this was just a quick grade I threw together, not really focused on how it looks, more so interested in how it performs. So I guess that answers that question. Without noise reduction, you can pretty much expect zero issues. We'll go ahead and I guess keep layering a few more things, and we'll start off with noise reduction. So we're just going to turn this on across the board. We'll go back to our ProRes timeline and see what we get. So here we go, first clip and play. So we're losing a few frames per second here, and we've got it on 3 frames of noise reduction, temporal noise reduction that is. Go ahead and pull this settings up for you now. So hitting play, I mean, it's, yeah, 18 frames a second. It is still fairly snappy. This could potentially work if you're just trying to get an idea of what the footage is going to look like. It's not full speed, and I think I mentioned if I could get 20 frames per second with raw noise reduction, I'd be pretty satisfied. And honestly, we're not far off. We're getting 16 to 18, sometimes bumping into 19 frames a second here. So honestly, that's meeting my expectations. I still would prefer full speed, especially with it being ProRes. That's going to be the most suitable for this machine to run. But with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the red footage now with noise reduction enabled. And yeah, just as expected, similar situation with just 2 or 3 frames a second lower, actually sitting down at 13 to 15 roughly. And it is jumping between clips. No real extra delay there. Just continuing on with that 12 to 15 frames per second playback speed here. But it is still jumpy. It's very responsive. It doesn't feel like the machine is just bogging down. Like we can switch back to the edit page and everything loads very, very quickly. So I don't think it's absolutely bogging the machine down because everything, like I said, is very snappy. It's just having an issue playing back with that noise reduction at full speed in this 1080p timeline. So I can only imagine if we jumped it to 4K, I know that's going to be just brutal on this thing. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. And of course, that's going to send us from a 1080p timeline to a 4K timeline. So it's basically 4 times the amount of processing, roughly. And if we hit spacebar, yeah, we're getting only 6 frames a second. With that being said, though, my reference monitor is only a 1080p monitor, so I'm almost never grading in a 4K timeline. I'm always running off of a 1080p timeline, and then if it does need to be rendered to 4K, I'll do just one more cleanup pass, making sure everything looks all right on a separate 4K monitor, not regarding the actual color, because the color is not going to change. But just if I have grain, that's going to be scaled differently. Noise reduction is going to show a little bit more detail, so I want to make sure everything still looks good in 4K. But I don't necessarily need that full speed playback in 4K because my reference monitor is 1080p, but that could be something to consider depending on what you're working with. So we're going to set that back to 1080p timeline. We know that it's struggling there. We're getting around 6 frames per second with noise reduction enabled on the red code raw footage. And now we'll go to the GoPro footage, H.265. And again, this is 4K clips. Hit and play here with noise reduction enabled. We're actually sitting 18, 19 frames a second. So that's very doable. You could definitely be grading a project and this would work. You'd be able to get an idea of what the footage is going to look like. Now you are losing roughly 5 frames per second in that playback speed, but that's enough to actually see what's happening in the footage. It's not going to feel that rough. So is it suitable? I would say it works, but nothing wrong with just full on 24 frames a second playback. As you see, we have without noise reduction added, and a couple layers of film grain, some halation, and all those OFX tools. So again, just to recap there, ProRes, we get between 18 and 19 frames per second. And then with red footage, we're getting around 17, 16, 15 frames per second with noise reduction enabled. And then lastly, with GoPro footage, our H.265, that very compressed footage that was typically in the past, especially on MacBooks with Intel processors, it definitely struggled, and that would be one of the worst codecs to work with. Now we're actually seeing around 19 to 20 frames per second with noise reduction and all these extra steps added to that grade there. So all in all, I mean, I'm pretty impressed. Obviously, full speed playback would have been great, but this is the real world, and I got to be honest, 18 to 19 is still going to be just fine for what I do. And again, there is always caching that you can do if you do absolutely need that full speed playback. Now, where it's going to get interesting is if you're adding, more effects like light rays, lens flares, all that just extra stuff, getting more into the effects world, VFX stuff, you could definitely expect to see a further drop if you're stacking it with noise reduction. Now what I want to do is go ahead and just add in a little bit of a more complex node tree. This shot here should be fine. It's going to be a longer shot so we can have an idea of how it's going to play back over time. I'm going to go ahead and grab this still, and then let's go to some of my power grades here. We'll just bring in that 16mm power grade, set this to the proper input, which is going to be red wide gamut log 3G10. Right there. And we can probably pull back on some of that saturation there. Right here should be good. Okay, so what this is, we've got a few different things going on here. We'll delete that shot matching node. We have our pre-look, which is basically just going to be our balancing. We've got a Cineon conversion into some halation. It's a custom built node tree there. Glow, we have a couple different effects here for our grain. Separation, primaries, lift and pull, which is all this is basically just some primary tools. Then a film LUT, it's really just layering all of them together. How's it going to run that? And then hue versus, a lot of curves there. We have a bleach bypass effect, we'll enable that. We will turn on just this warm look modifier, as well as this other warm look modifier, softening some skin, so it's going to be pulling a qualifier. And let's go ahead and play this back. And now you see it's starting to slow down quite a bit. It definitely took, a second or two to actually get to that full speed. The first time it was, at least. Now it's just a little bit snappier, but we're getting right around 16 frames per second playback with all of this being enabled here. So as you get into more nodes, especially with more effects, and like I said, these are compound nodes here, so there's a lot more going on inside of them. But as you get into that higher node count, you're gonna see those frames per second take a little bit bigger of a hit. So keep that in mind. Hate to break your hearts, but that's just the real world. This isn't going to be nonstop full speed playbacks, but it is really solid. It's an impressive machine. There's no real lag as we're jumping between clips. It's really just going to be that slower frames per second. We'll go ahead and apply that node tree to this clip. And yep, just as we expected, similar frames per second. 15 to 16 frames a second there. All right, so now we have a pretty good idea of what to expect with playback times. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the render times. I've just gone ahead and rendered out, let's see, total of 16 different timelines. And honestly, I'm pretty impressed with the results overall. I'm gonna try and get some kind of graphic up so it's easy to comprehend all these numbers. But to just get started, so I did two different types of renders. We did one with H.264 and then one is ProRes. And I think that's gonna be pretty common because honestly, that's 99% of the renders I do. It's either gonna be ProRes or H.264. Then we also did, within those two categories, we did one with noise reduction and one without. So between the GoPro, ProRes, and then Red footage, all their timelines, we went ahead and made them each 60-second timelines so we could have some consistency there when we're evaluating all the render speeds and everything. So for the GoPro timeline without noise reduction, rendering in H.264, we got 37 seconds to render that 60-second timeline. And then for ProRes, we got 39 seconds. And then Red was a little bit slower at 53 seconds. Then we had the mixture of all the different footage, and that was a 4-minute timeline, and that had a final render speed of 3 minutes and 12 seconds. And then whenever we turned noise reduction on, I could go through the numbers again, but just expect to see about a 50% drop in playback speeds and render times. So now we go on to ProRes, and of course with the GoPro, we see very similar results across the board. I mean, almost identical regardless of whether you're using H.264 or ProRes, which I wasn't actually expecting because with my PC, I did see a little bit different render times, depending on what I was rendering. But granted, these are all 1080p timelines and 1080p renders. So expect to see a little bit of a drop if you're going up to 4K. So like I said, going from H.264 to ProRes, as far as the renders go, we really just don't see any difference. I mean, we're talking about fractions of a second with those render times. Nothing really changed overall. And so before I actually get to my final verdict as of whether or not this is going to be replacing my PC as my main workstation, there's a couple other things I wanted to mention outside of these other performance specs we've been talking about. And that's just a couple of things that I was impressed with speed-wise. So the scene cut detect, that's something in the PC, for some reason, it was just a little bit slower. I guess actually a lot slower. Whenever I was doing it here on the Mac, it was running probably 3 or 4 times faster through a timeline doing a scene cut detect than it would on the PC. Not exactly sure why, and it was pretty consistent across the board regardless of what resolution or the codec that I was doing the scene cut detect on. Another thing was opening projects. They've gotten faster regardless of what operating system you're on. Resolve used to take forever to open. Now it's quite a bit faster, but especially on this machine, it is lightning fast. I think it takes like 8 to 10 seconds now to open, whereas it used to take almost a minute. So there's that, and then also switching projects. If you're bouncing between projects, it was very quick to open a totally different project, whereas that used to have a little bit of more of a delay. And then also one important thing to note here is that my PC, obviously it's got its own dedicated video card, and I guess to an extent the MacBook does as well, but that video card has its own output, so I can obviously run 2 display ports out, and it's got no problem with that. And then it's got its own video card for running the SDI into the reference monitor. And I guess the bypass there for the MacBook is to have that Thunderbolt out, which is Blackmagic's Ultra Studio 3G. All of that information being pulled from it to run 3 different screens, 2 of them at 4K, 1 at 1080. And then also just all the peripherals that I've got there. There's countless things on the desk that are all pulling power and information from the machine. So even with all those additional screens, all those peripherals, we see no impact in performance. It's still incredibly quick. It always gets the job done and it opens everything very quickly. And then also, if you've ever recorded long duration clips on a GoPro, you'll know that it caps it at like 4 gigabytes a clip, and then it will split it into multiple clips similar to how Red does. If you ever needed to like bring those into a timeline and then render it out as one clip, I had to do that the other day, and then just rendering raw H.265 footage as an H.264 clip. It was like an hour-and-a-half timeline, and I just selected it all, hit render, no real grading on top of it, but it was rendering at like 280 frames per second. So that's pretty quick, and if you do have those longer timelines and you're not doing a lot of heavy, intense work to it, that's going to be something you're really going to appreciate, is those crazy render times with minimal workloads. And then just keep in mind, rendering those master files at higher resolutions is going to take longer. It's just going to be a lot more work for the machine to do. Just rendering out 4 or 8 times the amount of pixels, that's 4 or 8 times the amount of information oftentimes. That's going to obviously slow things down quite a bit. So with all that said, the final verdict, will this be replacing my PC? Absolutely. And for a couple of reasons. One just being, it's enough. It does the job. It gets the job done. I'm not having to sit around and wait on it to pull things up. Also, transferring files here is a lot faster than on the PC, partly just because of how Apple has designed all of that architecture to run together. These new machines move files like nothing, especially if you're going from one partition to another on the same hard drive. But also using Thunderbolt, that's something that's a little bit harder to get on PC. It usually takes an extra PCIe slot to run that. And here, just moving files is a breeze, and obviously as colorists, we do that a lot. Upload speeds are also great because I can get that 10 gigabit Ethernet port plugged in, and I have gig speed fiber, so a little bit faster upload speeds here on my end between the PC and the Mac, just because the limiting factor for me is just a little bit slower Ethernet port on the PC. So that's another big benefit. And then things like AirDrop, iMessage, reminders, having notes, all just sync between my devices. I use all those tools a lot to write the scripts for these videos, just jot out ideas, and just communicating with clients as well. It's a massive time saver. So with all that factored in, even if I'm getting slightly slower render speeds, it's still worth the switch because of all the other performance and efficiency gains I have using the Mac. So with that said, guys, thanks so much for watching. Please be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like on this video, and let me know in the comments what you want to see next. And with that, I will see you guys in the next one.